It was the 1950s. The civil rights movement was gathering steam like never before, and two charismatic black leaders were inspiring the oppressed to fight back.
We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop.
Albeit in completely different ways. At the same time, internationally, it was a decade marked by the politics of the Cold War. Two big powers vying for dominance. Capitalist America against the communist Soviet Union. Within the states, a deep-seated aversion to communism had taken root. The state had one mantra: whatever you do, don't be a communist. It was against this backdrop that Malcolm X, the fiery advocate for black people and the spokesperson for the Nation of Islam, announced to the world that he was a communist. A declaration that irked the powerful quarters. Not least the man at the helm of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover. COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program of the FBI. Hoover could sense trouble. X and Dr. King were breathing new life into the black nationalist movement. Cracks were beginning to appear in the oppressive status quo, and one of the leaders of the revolution was a communist. So Hoover decided to keep tabs. He had a system in place. It was called COINTELPRO, a counterintelligence program that attempted to expose, disrupt, and neutralize groups that Edgar Hoover perceived as a threat to national security. The way to do that was through constant surveillance and infiltration. Some of the FBI's targets were the Communist Party of the USA, most black nationalist groups, and the Nation of Islam, headed by Elijah Muhammad. Why Malcolm X? The FBI took special interest in Malcolm X, a leading member of the Nation of Islam, who was viewed as a controversial figure among the general public. X was unapologetically disruptive. He never shied away from calling out the realities of anti-black racism, and unlike Dr. King, he rarely showed any interest in uniting with white people. He was ruthless in his assessment and famously referred to white people as blue-eyed devils.
Don't blame a cracker in Georgia for your injustices. The government is responsible for the injustices. The government can bring these injustices to halt.
Everything he stood for made him a target. The FBI viewed Malcolm X as a dangerous black radical figure who needed to be brought down. Hoover was especially terrified of a black messiah and was quoted as saying, "There must be a goal of preventing a coalition of black nationalist groups and preventing the rise of a figure who can unify and electrify the black nationalist movement." Hoover went as far as sending a telegram to the FBI office in New York City, asking them to do something about Malcolm X. It is no surprise that the Detroit office of the FBI began keeping tabs on Malcolm in 1953 and continued surveillance until his assassination in 1965. The tactics. On the night of March 8, 1971, a bunch of anti-Vietnam War dissidents broke into a suburban Philadelphia FBI office and stole documents that revealed Edgar J. Hoover's nefarious surveillance program. The files detailed the tactics the FBI employed to neutralize threats. One way to do that was through infiltration. In Malcolm's case, the Bureau had planted multiple high-ranking paid human informants within the leadership of the Nation of Islam. These informants created paranoia among the leadership and caused an everlasting rift between Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X, which ultimately led to Malcolm's death in 1965. But there was much more. The FBI fed stories to the media and spread rumors about the rivalry, even when the two figures were on cordial terms. The secret agency even spread rumors about black leaders, preventing them from gaining respectability and discrediting them to their community. Pitting black leaders against one another was one of the explicit goals of COINTELPRO. To that end, the FBI continued to fan the flames of distrust between X and Dr. King, causing division among the masses as well. Then there was the outright surveillance and phone tapping. The NYPD had a special unit called the Bureau of Special Services and Investigations, or BOSSI, which was effectively working as a spy ring. Its members were sent to Malcolm's rallies and tasked with recording his calls. According to one former agent, they constantly tapped Malcolm's calls and switched on their wiretap on the second ring because that's when Malcolm would always pick up and wouldn't hear the click. Dozens of FBI informants were always present during Malcolm's addresses. If it was a massive audience, then white FBI agents could attend. However, for a smaller audience, they found black men and met them in movie theaters to arrange surveillance or to trade information. The FBI didn't leave Malcolm X alone on his overseas trips to Africa and the Middle East. He was under surveillance even during his pilgrimage to Saudi Arabia. During the 12 years of surveillance, the FBI had compiled over 70 reports of Malcolm X, a fact that lends credibility to the claim that the FBI had a role to play in the great man's assassination. Malcolm X always knew. While the FBI laid their trap, they underestimated the brilliance of the man they were after. Malcolm X had always been skeptical of the government. He never accepted things at face value and understood how far the FBI would go to incriminate him and harm his cause. He would regularly claim that the powers that be were after his life and that he was being watched at all times. He even mocked the FBI and the government in his rallies, which frustrated the FBI. So they made efforts to discredit him. According to declassified documents, the FBI diagnosed Malcolm X with pre-psychotic paranoid schizophrenia, arguing that he was obsessed with the government. However, even if Malcolm X did display paranoid symptoms, the cause is now obvious. The government was indeed profiling him and tapping his phone. He was right all along. His paranoia was never misplaced, and it helped him expose the corrupt government and their agencies. During his speeches, X began calling out the informants within the crowd. He would start his address with, "Mr. Moderator, friends, enemies," letting them know he was aware. He would then continue, "Everyone is here."
Assalamu alaikum. Mr. Moderator, our distinguished guests, brothers and sisters, our friends and our enemies.
In his book, In the Sword and the Shield, historian Peniel E. Joseph quotes Malcolm admitting that, when speaking publicly, "I'd guess which were FBI faces in the audience or other types of agents." One of the leading methods employed by the FBI to break the civil rights movement was to bribe and blackmail the black leaders. However, when they tried to pull the same trick on Malcolm, he could see right through it. A visit from the FBI. On February 4th, 1964, 2 FBI agents visited Malcolm at his home. They were after crucial information about the members of the Nation of Islam, information that could potentially help them disband the group. Malcolm X had been a loyal member of the NOI for over 10 years, and even though he was in the middle of a massive rift with Elijah Muhammad, he refused to snitch. Malcolm welcomed the agents in. However, he did to them what the FBI had secretly been doing for years. He recorded the 2 agents who tried to bribe him and even threatened him indirectly. The agents wanted access to information. They wanted names, and one went as far as saying, "Money brings out the information." However, Malcolm denied having any such access. Instead, he replied in no uncertain terms, "You insult my intelligence. You insult your own, that you wouldn't know in advance what I'm going to say." He emphasized that he was no snitch, and that there is no government agency that can ever expect to get any information out of me that is in any way detrimental to any religious group or black group for that matter in this country.
As you know, we follow the activities of the Muslims as best we can, but we're always looking for new avenues of information, and who better than the head of the Muslims. Money brings out the information. I have no intent to insult you here.
No government agency. He also let them know that the dollar itself was in bad shape, and that a person would be a fool to sell his soul for one of these decreasing dollars. The agents later described him as nice and courteous, but not too cooperative. This wasn't the only time the FBI tried to crack Malcolm X. They tried to get to him many times, but he was always a step ahead. In Malcolm's own words, "I hadn't hustled in the streets for years for nothing. I knew when I was being set up." By all accounts, Malcolm X was a visionary. He didn't just see through the FBI surveillance tactics. He was also well aware that his life was in danger. Just weeks before his demise, he told a reporter that he was a marked man and that his disputes with the Nation of Islam would be resolved by death and violence. How X won. Despite the FBI's incessant propaganda, Malcolm X only grew in stature. The civil rights leader was 39 when he was assassinated in 1965 at an auditorium in New York's Washington Heights neighborhood. While he remained divisive throughout his life, his death cemented his place in history. His influence peaked to newer heights, and he became an undisputed hero among the masses. Between 1965 and 1977, the autobiography of Malcolm X sold 6 million copies worldwide. In subsequent polls, more than 80% of African Americans saw Malcolm as a hero, a number that has only increased since. Malcolm X influenced the civil rights movement in a way no one else could.
They were suffering all forms of colonization, oppression, exploitation, degradation, humiliation, discrimination, and every other kind of ation. And in a short time, they have gained more independence, more recognition, more respect as human beings than you and I have.
His advocacy for many Black Americans was much more accurate than some of his counterparts. His unapologetic activism helped Black Americans be more expressive and reconnected them to their roots. The FBI, on the other hand, took a massive hit to its credibility. Once regarded as the best intelligence agency in the world, the organization was forced to pay substantial damages for the COINTELPRO program. To this day, the agency is forced to answer questions over surveillance and the unsolved deaths of Black leaders several decades ago. Malcolm X has achieved the status of an icon. His legacy lives on, and the FBI continues to fight for legitimacy. Yet, they have the power of the government. But in the grand scheme of things, Malcolm X defeated Hoover's agency quite emphatically.